Hey everybody, welcome back to the JPU show. I'm Badr. If this is your first time tuning in, welcome to the channel. Do me a favor, subscribe so you can stay up to date with all of our latest videos. And if you're listening on the audio version, go to subscribe too. All right, if you haven't subscribed already, hit that subscribe button. I've also got my co-host, the big brain, Blythe with me. Hey Blythe.
Hello.
We are recording on a kind of somber, rainy day, which is true to form for Jacksonville in the summer. So if you hear that in the background, I hope you feel cozy while listening. All right, this is going to be a cozy kind of vibe today. We are discussing in this video how to build in vacation breaks with your show, which I think is an underrated topic in podcasting. I think for a lot of veteran podcasters, or really, I guess it's not just a veteran thing, but the word pod fade comes to mind for folks that have been podcasting a long time, meaning that you just kind of fade out. You kind of burn out from podcasting since it is such a rigorous and, well, I guess depending on your show type, it can be a lot of work. No, it is a lot of work to maintain a show, record on a weekly basis, to be consistent. You can feel burnt out at a certain point. So this topic was recommended by Blythe because she's the big brain around here. So, Blythe, why do you think taking breaks or vacationing is important? Do you think that that you run into? I mean, with most shows being weekly and a consistency kind of being a topic that we preach, how do vacations and breaks play a role in podcasting?
I think to take a step back, I came up with this topic because I'm kind of feeling it right now. It's we're recording this in the middle of July, just a few days off of July 4th, and historically July is a very I don't know for you, but for me it's very challenging to get guests on for any kind of like July type of content. It's frustrating. You think you have a few things lined up, and then all of a sudden, everybody wants to reschedule because everybody's taking time off. And so knowing that, I've actually built it into my sponsorship contracts that July and December are just famously hard to get anybody to really commit to doing an interview consistently. Now, you will have, of course, like one-offs that are absolutely game to record. I mean, obviously, we are sitting here recording, we're going to be recording batch recording a few different shows. And I think that is probably my favorite approach to take when you're thinking about building in breaks. And I don't even know that people are thinking about building in breaks until they feel like they need one. And I think this is, sort of a perfect opportunity to talk about why you should be building in those breaks, especially given, the type of content you may be recording or the type of show that you may have, if it's interview based or even if it's solo. It's important to take downtime, because if you take that downtime, then it just reinvigorates you and it doesn't feel so monotonous and it doesn't feel like, oh, I have to do this. Where I would say, it's almost like the 80-20 like given rule. If you enjoy 80% of it, you deal with the 20% of the BS that you don't necessarily want to deal with all the time. And for whatever reason, July and December just feel like the months that, are good to step away, are good to focus on more things that can release the creative spirit in you. And I think that for all the other months, it feels much more of a, we're in full swing, we're in a grind. And then for whatever reason, well, I know the reason, but just summer hits and, people got other priorities. And maybe you should be building those priorities into your show as well.
Let me ask you this: what's the longest break you've taken from like regular podcasting? Because you also release episodes weekly. What's the longest a downtime you've taken?
Like ever?
Yeah, like
I
whatever
would
comes to
say
mind.
probably before I started the Everything is Logistics podcast, or no, not Everything is Logistics. I would say before I started the Digital Dispatch podcast, because I was in sports and entertainment for forever. So my podcast was in that realm. And so when I started Digital Dispatch, which is a logistics marketing firm or logistics website management firm, I should say, I wasn't sure how the podcast would play a role. I kept it active, but I would say I probably went 4 or 5 months without producing a new episode for that show. But it was also a lot of downtime to think about I guess, who am I if I'm not making, this sports and entertainment show, that I've been making for, I don't know, like 5 or 6 years at that point. That was probably the longest time. But since then, the show evolved into having conversations with my customers. Now, I didn't have the frequency that I have now with 2 episodes a week. Um, which is mostly interview based or having a regular guest on that we can sort of riff on a few different topics. I would call her more of a friend than, really like it's a co-host slash friend relationship, which I'm sure, most people out there have that. But with everything is logistics, I knowing that the July, December timeframe has historically been challenging to book interviews. I built it into my sponsorship contracts from the jump that July and December are going to be harder to fulfill, the regular episode obligations of 8 episodes a month. So, I put it in like terminology wise of like, we either take a break or you might notice some repeat episodes being uploaded. So that is how I have historically taken that approach, is just finding the best episodes that have been performing over the last 6 to 8 months and just republishing them during the downtime. I will say, though, that we actually just decided today that we'll be publishing one more episode in July, and then all of the episodes that I've been working on, because I just recently took a NASA trip. And so that content, I'm going to wait until August to start publishing and really hit the August to January timeframe with my episode plan. So those 4 or 5 months was probably the shortest time frame, but I think it was a lot of like life figuring out of what I want to do, how am I going to balance a podcast and a business at the same time. And then it was more or less of, okay, well, I'll just use the podcast to get business. And then it just evolved from there.
I think, admittedly, in the 12 going on 13 years I've been podcasting, I think the longest break I've ever taken was not willingly. I think the longest break I had to take because I was enlisted in the military, and we did like a 3-month deployment was the longest. After that, I think, and next would probably be like, I think I might have taken like a 2-week break. I think maybe we were on vacation or something, and I just had like 2 weeks off, and I remember feeling so guilty. Like, oh my God, I'm gonna lose all my listeners. They're gonna be upset at me. Like, my downloads are gonna be terrible, and and I think that's things that you work up in your head as someone that like is just kind of gotten used to the routine of, especially for me, like recording on Sunday and editing Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday the release, and Wednesday, Thursday I'm promoting it, and rinse and repeat, come Sunday again. So I think there is a such thing as like just being so accustomed to a rigid schedule and kind of having a little bit of that anxiety of like, oh my God, like what am I doing? Like this is what I do. So, this is an interesting topic for me, considering that I have not taken a long break
That's
in a long
crazy.
time. Committed, baby. That's what I'm talking. No, but I swear I say it every year. I'm going to take the summer off, and then that the summer comes around, I'm like, okay, well, maybe I'll just take or maybe I'll just take the month of July off, and then we're in July, and I've still got like 2 episodes planned, and I'm thinking about interviews and grabbing things, and I don't know, part of it's just, I think, a little bit of that routine. Like, I do enjoy that routine, and the other part is that because I'm focusing more on interviews, I got to just take them as they come. If a good interview comes around and the opportunity is there, I'll jump on it, and regardless if I'm taking a break or whatnot. So I'm excited to share some of these tips that hopefully I will be incorporating here shortly. So let's talk about some of these tips that we got for our listeners on how to build in some break time, some vacations into your show. You just mentioned it, so let's start with that, which is batch recording. So if you're brand new to podcasting, that phrase doesn't have any meaning to you. Batch recording is recording multiple episodes in ideally one sitting. For example, Blythe kind of shared or revealed that we're batch recording today, so we're going to be doing 4 different segments, and that way we've got some in the bank. We're not pressured or running with our heads cut off trying to get episodes out. We can schedule ahead of time and plan accordingly, which I which I think is such a smart move for any kind of content creator, especially if you're doing like a regular weekly show. Now, I think it gets a little tricky if you have a topical, timely show that addresses things that are happening in the now and whatnot. That can be a little tricky. Also, interviews too. As someone that interviews a lot of writers and artists that have books that are, scheduled to come out in a week or two, that's something that you got to keep in mind. But I think batch recording is maybe the easiest way to build in those breaks and give yourself some leeway if something does happen, because life happens. You can't account for everything. So if you can find opportunity to pick a day that works for you where you can block off 2 or 3 hours and knock out a few recordings and give yourself that time to edit. I've batch recorded, and my issue is that I think I kind of rest on my laurels where I'm like, oh, I got 3 episodes, I'll edit those next week. And then next week comes and it's like, oh, I'll edit those next week. And it always happens to be, now I'm back to my regular routine. So words to the wise, if you're going to batch record, also plan to edit and get those, queued up and ready to, publish ahead of time. Give yourself plenty of leeway. Do you got anything to add to that, Black?
No, I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head with batch recording. I think it's an underutilized tool because for us, like this is a second show for us in addition to our full-time jobs. Anybody who is doing one show and one full-time job knows how much of a time commitment it is. And so it's admittedly been a little bit of a struggle to try to find what that sweet spot looks like for this. I think that the sweet spot for this show is that we can talk about a lot of these topics straight from memory. There's not or experience. There's not a whole heck of a lot of prep work that goes into this show. I would say you do more of the work on the editing end of things, and then it's the scheduling and it's the getting the shows out to the audience that after the fact. But batch recording is probably going to be the only way that we can successfully manage this show in addition to all of our other responsibilities. And at first, we toyed with let's record, a couple topics every other week. And now we've settled on, okay, once a month, 4 topics, and then that way that will be enough content for the following month. And so that way it does give us that breathing room. So it could help for other folks out there. I mean, it is, sort of 4:30 on a Wednesday afternoon at the time that we're recording this. And so we'll probably be doing this until about 7:30. And so I think for a lot of folks, trying to find the balance of managing the podcast and managing all of your other life responsibilities, picking a time, blocking that time frame off, once a month, and then thinking about it from a batch perspective, I think could be really helpful.
Let's go to our second point here, or second tip, which is repurposing and re-releasing old episodes. This is a strategy that I've been using to kind of buy myself time on weeks where I don't have, where I haven't, maybe I haven't batch recorded and I don't have anything in the bank and I need to, and I still want to release something. I have found that re-releasing old episodes, which we've addressed a few times on other videos, where re-releasing old episodes gives you an opportunity to spotlight, your best of episodes that you're probably a little more proud of, or episodes that you feel like maybe just wasn't the right time. Maybe it didn't, what's the word I'm thinking of, resonate with your audience at that right time. And also it gives you an opportunity to reintroduce certain episodes to new listeners. Like if you consider that you never know how many new listeners or new ears or eyes are stumbling upon your channel or your video. And you also got to consider like the algorithms too. Maybe, one of your viewers, listeners, whatever it may be, just didn't see that episode when it dropped. But now you got an opportunity to put it right back in front of them, and put a spotlight on some of your older material, especially once again if you got evergreen content. That's just that. The definition's in there, like evergreen. It can always be used. Have you got anything to add for this?
Well, I think it's important for people to remember that nobody remembers your content the way that you remember your content. So if you take a few weeks off, chances are they're not really going to notice because they have so many other things that are trying to capture their attention. So if you're not showing up in the feed, that's not necessarily what they're going to be thinking about. Is like, oh my God, where is this show from this week? They didn't drop an episode. That's it. I'm not listening to them anymore. I'm not a fan of theirs anymore. They missed one day, your audience is not thinking about you like that. I'm sorry. It's just the overwhelming majority of shows, or the overwhelming majority of audiences will just keep scrolling, and they will just find something else to capture their attention. And to I guess add on to that point, there's times when other things do grab their attention, even if you do release shows. So I'm a big fan, especially in the month of December, of taking some of my best of episodes and putting them all together in sort of a best of for a specific topic. So I'll separate my content into different topics, and then I'll release like a super episode that's like a couple hours long, that includes a bunch of different episodes in that one episode. But it's essentially a re-release. We're just editing it slightly to be a super episode instead of just one. But uploading just one too is also a really good idea, because for the same reasons, is that they could just miss your content, or meant to go back and watch it or listen to it, and they just, they forget, and people move on, and that you need to be able to shove it in their face a little bit more.
Well said. And the last tip that I've got on my list of notes is one I was trying to think like outside the box, because we've talked about batch recording, we've talked about repurposing and re-releasing old episodes, but also thinking about ways that you can provide content and maybe like new episodes to folks, and also by yourself, maybe to account for some time off and break. And that is episode trading with another podcast, which I think is a little more advanced, maybe a little more tricky, and involves a little more moving parts here. But if you have a podcast that maybe you've guessed it on another podcast, or your friends, or another podcast, and you guys have that trust and that relationship, maybe asking to use that audio or that episode into your main feed, and to drop it, an episode from another show, whether you've guessed it on it, or maybe one that you like and you want to kind of do like some sort of swap, to put that into your main feed. I personally haven't. Well, I take that back. I have actually done that. Thinking about the JPU, Warren Evans, who hosts the Simpsons Greater Than podcast, when he first launched his show, I put his pilot episode on the Shortbox main feed to help him kind of like get in front of like some of my listeners, and introduce them to this new show, and and it also gave me a week off per se. So if you have a relationship, or if you got a situation like that where you can use an episode from another podcast, that whether it be, now granted, you maybe want to consider like, or is this applicable to my audience? Like, is this, hopefully this won't catch them completely off guard. This isn't something that they wouldn't like. Like, I think this is why I'm saying, I think this is a little more advanced, like you really want to get to know your audience. But I think it gives you an opportunity to account for, getting a week off per se, and giving them something fresh that will ideally maybe get your or their show, in front of your audience. And maybe that there's a trade situation going on where it's like, hey, I'll put an episode of yours in my feed to give me, a week off, or, to count for my break, and vice versa. I'll pay that, we could do that, do the trade later on. What do you think about that?
I personally would not do this. I would not. I would not take somebody else's episode and put it on my feed. I think that would just be too jarring. I assume
even if you recorded, even if you were to record an intro that kind of explained the situation, like, hey, I'm on break. I was on this podcast last week. They're
so
great
that's
people.
Different in my opinion.
Okay.
So it's different because I personally always ask for a copy of the file anytime I'm on someone else's show, and I will take a copy of that and put it up on my podcast feed. I will do a special intro for that. But just to take somebody else's separate show and put it on mine, I don't really have an interest in doing that. I get why you did it, because you and Warren have a good rapport with each other. You both been on each other's shows, so I feel like they kind of both know each other. And I am assuming that you also did an intro, like setting it up for him. So I would completely get that. I just no. I no. Mm-mm.
Even if it's an episode of another podcast, a logistics podcast that you were a guest on, and you had a pretty predominant speaking role, you still wouldn't consider that?
No, if I'm a guest on it, yes, absolutely.
Sure.
Then I would put that episode on. But if I'm not a guest on,
That's
saying
fair.
a guest on that specific episode, then I will put it on. I would put it on my podcast. But if I'm not a guest on that episode, no.
That's fair. And you know what? I might revise that where I think that is the better strategy. Because you're right. If you don't hear, if your audience is there for you, and if they don't hear your voice, I think you're right. It is a little weird.
I was going to say, I know that like, Wondery or, Business Wars podcast series, which I think is a Wondery production, but they do this a lot where they will take a trailer from one of their other shows that they're about to launch and they will put it on their main feed. I have seen even like some Bloomberg podcasts
Yeah, I see that a
will
lot
do
in
that too.
yeah, I see
But I
that a
never
lot in
listened to them.
I see that a lot in net. Well, I mean, but who knows who is listening to them? You
Yeah,
know, like I think that makes more sense if you're in a network or you're trying to start a network, and it makes sense for everyone to be promoting each other's work.
I
So
guess, but just seeing like a 3-minute long episode or trailer for another show, I'm never going
I
to press play on
yeah,
that.
I usually skip those two because they're just so short. They're almost not worth the
Yeah, it's
time
not worth your time.
unless they're like queued up automatically. I'll let that ride. So I think that with that one, that's a case by case scenario. I think at the very least, maybe consider repurposing an episode that you were a guest on onto your main feed if you're
For
thinking
sure.
about like trying to backfill content where you're on a break or vacation.
Yeah, for
Which
sure.
I think brings us to the end of my list. Blythe, do you got anything else to add before we wrap up?
No, I would say that this is a really good way to, feel like you can take a break without or it's because there's still some work involved in this. Like you still have to set aside time to batch record. You still have to set aside time to release those old episodes, even though granted it is, less work. I, I would still stress the importance of, and this is probably me just like talking to myself, but like it's okay to take a break. Like it's okay to take a few weeks off, because I know that when I come back, I'm gonna be filled with like creative energy. I mean, I just took a few days off, last week for 4th of July, and I almost had too many ideas in my head, and so I know how crucial the breaks are. I think it's just stressing that it's okay to take a break. But if you are stressing about it, like I kind of already am panicking a little bit about like, oh my God, it's July 10th and I'm not going to release another episode until August. I might go back and release some old episodes now that I'm thinking about it. I might not take the full like 3 weeks off of publishing a new episode, but I might go back and re-release some episodes. But I think it's a lot of self-talk, and maybe that's a topic for another conversation of that own sort of internal anxiety, and that your audience will probably understand if you need to take a break.
For sure. I think your audience, a strong, dedicated audience, a compassionate, reasonable audience would rather you take a break and avoid feeling burnt out and then coming back and providing, the best you on a podcast rather than, just kind of fading out into obscurity and never releasing one. So in closing, take a break if you need it. Pod fade is real. Avoid burnout where you can because you deserve it as well. And if you're going to take that time off and return, think about use that as an opportunity to feel refreshed, come up with new ideas. I think sometimes with the weekly release kind of grind, you just get so laser focused on the process and just accomplishing these things that feel like muscle memory that I know for me, I'm excited to take a longer break so I can let the creative juices flowing. Look at the show from a different angle. I know I've got like different ideas. I just don't have the time to implement those. And hopefully, if you're listening, you take some of these pieces of advice to heart. And we would love. Oh, God bless.
I was going to say one more last thing. Whether you are feeling refreshed or whether you're feeling burnt out, it's going to show in your content. So you have to choose those breaks wisely.
Well said. And I think of that, I want to say if you've got your own ideas, tips, and on ways on how you've taken a break and still been able to release episodes, or maybe even not, if we've missed anything, we would love to hear from the viewers and listeners at home. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Check out our other videos. We've got a video that we are about to record on why and how to organize your content that I think would make for a great companion to this episode. So check that out. We've got plenty of other videos that are extremely helpful if you're a podcaster. Thanks again, and we'll catch you around next time. Peace.